Ladies and gentlemen, gosh, you're a long way away up there. Can you hear us all right? Up in the cheap seats? In the gods. Somebody waved. Excellent. Good to see you. My name's Andrew Neil. I'm chairman of the Spectator magazine group, and on behalf of the Spectator and our sponsors tonight, Brew and Dolphin, who have made this event possible, we'd like to welcome you to our very special debate tonight. We've assembled, I think you'll agree, a great team of speakers. That's why tonight's event is a sellout. Indeed, we could have sold a lot more if we could have got more seats into this. So it's delighted to see so much interest in coming to this debate. It's the second debate we've done in Edinburgh. The first debate last year was on wind power. And I suspect from both sides there'll be a lot of wind power tonight as well to keep up our theme. The motion before us tonight is independence is the greatest threat to Edinburgh. We zoomed in the motion on the capital, but of course it is also in general about independence itself. Now, the format is as follows. There will be 3 speakers for the motion, 3 against. The speakers will all get 9 minutes to present their case. After 8 minutes exactly, I will do that just to remind them they have 1 minute to go. I'll be quite brutal on that simply for purposes of fairness. Once we've heard the 6 speakers, 3 on each side of the argument, and they will speak from the lectern up there, I will then announce the result of the vote that you made on the way in. Because it's part of the feature of Spectator debates, we take your views as you come in before you've heard the debate. And then, having announced that, I'll throw the debate open to the audience, and the panel themselves will begin to debate among themselves. Many of you here, I'm sure, have come with something to say, question to ask, and I want to encourage that too. I would simply point out that by the time we get to you, we will have had 6 9-minute speeches. So I'd appreciate no more speeches from the audience, but short, pithy points. Remember, brevity in these matters is both humane and wise. And that's what we'll try to do. And then we'll begin, as we come to the end of our proceedings, we'll begin to take the vote. We'll carry on debating among ourselves, and then we'll announce the result. There are, in a sense, 2 ways to win tonight. One is the straightforward, is the motion carried or is it defeated? But there's another way, which in a sense is who's won the debate, which is if there's a big chunk of don't knows on the way in, which way did the don't knows go? So it's possible to lose the motion, but still win the debate. So there are 2 ways that we can go tonight, and I think that's what makes the format of how we handle these debates interesting. We actually stole this format from another company, so we can't really claim the credit for it, but we're dining out on it. Let's, without further ado, get our debate underway. The motion before us tonight is independence is the greatest threat to Edinburgh. Our first speaker tonight for the motion is the Shadow Minister for Trade and Investment. Please welcome Ian Murray.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much indeed for attending this evening. Thanks to Andrew for chairing this wonderful event we'll have this evening. You can see the motion was up on the screen there. Is independence the greatest threat to Edinburgh? Well, I'm proposing that it is. Why do I do that? Well, your vote on the 18th September coming up later this year will be the most important decision that everybody in this room has ever made at the ballot box. And we all want to know what the consequences for that would be for our city. And I believe a yes vote would be hugely damaging to the city of Edinburgh. As someone who was born here, brought up here, educated here, went to university here, set up my own businesses here, failed in a few businesses here, and now represent a seat in the south of the city, I think I'm quite qualified to say that this is one of the most beautiful and vibrant cities in the world. Edinburgh City, I think, has benefited hugely from both the Union and, of course, devolution, probably more than anywhere else. Can you possibly imagine what would have happened to the Edinburgh economy if the UK economy did not save the banks? The consequences for tens of thousands of jobs would have been catastrophic. That bailout represented the best of our union: mutual trust, shared bonds, looking out for the family of all nations in the UK. The best of both worlds: a strong Scottish Parliament with the promise of more powers through the strength, security and stability of the wider United Kingdom. That financial sector may be under threat again with the uncertainty of independence. And what would that do for the Edinburgh economy? What would it do for jobs? What would it do for opportunities for young people? I want to use the short time I have this evening to look at 2 arguments of the many specifically around the economy and education. And let me use the example of one of our proudest companies, the stark terms of the landscape of an independent Scotland set out by Standard Life. The reality for Standard Life that they already started working establishing additional registered companies around the country. Standard Life is not just the UK's biggest provider of pensions and self-invested pensions, but one of Edinburgh's top employers, and one of Edinburgh's top employers for young people. So why do they share the concerns of many of Edinburgh's employers? Well, they have no certainty over the fiscal or monetary arrangements. They would have to seek a lender of last resort to back up their customers. And they are correct for the key questions around this debate. The currency. The pound is about much more than just the notes and coins in all our pockets. It determines the cost of our mortgages and credit cards, and without it, there would be a big impact on jobs, savings, pensions and benefits. These are the everyday things that are more secure and affordable with a strong Scotland as part of the United Kingdom, and that my constituents in Edinburgh South care about. The uncertainty over currency, I believe, is a dereliction of duty by those who propose to leave the UK. With no currency union, no central bank, no lender of last resort, no control of the very levers of power that the yes camp say they need, then there's little wonder why my constituents, whose jobs depend on these answers, are very concerned. And let me tell you a story about my own mortgage. Refinancing my mortgage through the Barclays Woolwich, posing the question to the senior mortgage advisor, what happens to my 5-year fixed-term rate come independence? After 3 weeks of toing and froing from the mortgage department to the chief executive's office, to the corporate governance office, the only answer I had in return was that I'd have to pay it back in sterling. That is simply not good enough. The next substantial issue for Standard Life is EU membership. What does that mean? Well, for a financial institution like Standard Life with many cross-border benefit schemes in terms of pensions, the law is they would have to be fully funded. With 98% of their customers in the rest of the United Kingdom, they surely cannot take that risk. Yes, say they'll seek a derogation from the European Union, but Croatia sought the same derogation just last year and was not only refused, but fined heavily for not following it. Now, the reason I use Standard Life is because they highlight that the economics of separation simply do not add up. We should not be risking jobs and livelihoods on empty promises that are not even in the Scottish Government's gift to deliver. Edinburgh is an economic powerhouse for the rest of Scotland. So if Edinburgh sneezes, the rest of Scotland will catch a cold. And that is why the effects of independence in Edinburgh are critical for the rest of Scotland. And it's not just isolated to financial services. A recent survey showed 70% of small and medium-sized businesses in Scotland did not think that independence would benefit them and that they would lose business. That means fewer jobs and less to spend on the public services that we all enjoy. It is clear that on currency, pensions, public services and taxation, that pooling of risk and sharing of resources across the UK is best for Edinburgh. It's a funny kind of independence, isn't it, which argues for the rapid dismantling of everything in the United Kingdom, followed by an equally rapid resurrection of everything we have just dismantled, except one big disadvantage. When the big decisions are made on monetary policy and inflation targets, on the cost of borrowing and the level of spending, on financial regulation and lender of last resort, there would be no Scottish voice in the room. So last week, when the Bank of England was looking at interest rates, they had to look at the effect across the whole of the UK. It's simple. If Scotland is part of the equation, our interests are considered, otherwise they are not. Secondly, let me turn to education. Edinburgh was the city of the Enlightenment, and we have a proud history of education pioneers. World-class universities such as Edinburgh, Heriot-Watt and Napier, to name but three, employ tens of thousands of staff in Edinburgh and support over 80,000 students just in this city alone. These institutions are the reason Scotland has more universities in the top 200 per head of population than any other country in the world. This is because of the Union, not despite it. The spirit of that enlightenment continues today. Edinburgh is the most successful city in the UK for spin-out businesses developing world-leading technologies, creating more jobs and investment in this city. Education encapsulates the best of both worlds, a devolved policy with responsibility at Holyrood, but the sharing of resources across the UK, which means more funding for cutting-edge research for science and inventors. And if you take nothing away from this evening, take this. Edinburgh gets more research and development funding from the UK Research Council than the entirety of the country of Wales. And that is recognised by former university principals last week, who said that the risks and uncertainties over leaving the UK would be considerable to the university sector and its financing. These are just two arguments of the many that show Edinburgh is a vibrant and wonderful capital city. Our city isn't perfect, we know that, but we must resist the arguments of those who will say that independence is a fix-all solution. Independence would threaten the success of our city. We are getting to the business end of the referendum campaign, and that requires, in my view, a more realistic and, if I may say, honest appraisal of what the Yes campaign's plans mean for independent Scotland. The say anything, be anything, do anything approach isn't helpful. A criticism of those plans that there isn't enough detail and fact to back the independence campaign, but we know that we need to do to help our city grow. If we want to keep our currency and keep the pound, we know we have to vote no. If we want to keep our membership of the European Union, we know we must vote no. If we want to keep and strengthen our relationship with the rest of the UK, we must vote no. And if we want to retain our shared tax and regulatory environment for business, we must also vote no. And if we want to avoid the set-up costs of a new Scottish state, costs that we'll only be told about after the vote, we must vote no. We must keep Scotland leading the United Kingdom, not leaving it. And I hope you'll join me in voting no, not just tonight, but also on the 18th of September, to protect the city that we all love and enjoy. Thank you.
Ian Murray. Ian Murray opening the debate for the motion. To open the debate against the motion, please welcome a former member of the Scottish Parliament for the Scottish Nationalists, now columnist for Scotland on Sunday, as well as a businessman. Please welcome Andrew Wilson.
Andrew, Bruin Dolphin and everyone from The Spectator, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. If you read The Spectator's Twitter feed, the descriptor for them is that they are firm but unfair. And I think we can see in the framing of tonight's motion where the country is debating should Scotland be an independent country, we're going to be debating is independence the biggest disaster that could befall Edinburgh. You can be happy because the debate we were going to have in April was going to be that independence would destroy Edinburgh. So I think we've melded it down a touch from that, Andrew. I think all of us who have come to love Edinburgh as our home city would say that we are resilient enough to face almost anything that stands ahead of us. I moved here as a very large number of years ago, and my father, who was from Glasgow, came through to the house and said, "Do you know, Andrew, your mother and I came to Edinburgh on honeymoon 50 years ago, and we never thought we'd be back so soon." And I think it's fair to say Edinburgh carries a duality of position within Scotland, but we can debate Edinburgh and we can debate the core of the question tonight. My opening contention is that all is change in the world at the moment. Reform is happening internationally and domestically wherever you look. The question for us is, do we do the change and lead it for ourselves, or is it done to us? If you look all around the institutions of life, whether it's Parliament itself, the 5th anniversary of the Westminster expenses scandal was this Sunday, whether it's the financial system, which amazingly, in crisis for 6 or 7 years, Ian has held up as an example of what's good. The churches, sport, broadcasters, the media, everywhere you look, everything is in crisis and lots needs fixed. Every country has to fix itself. My core contention is we'll be far better fixing the problems we face ourselves than having them fixed by a government we elect roughly 40% of the time, in my experience. We are in a reform era. The world is going to change fundamentally and forever. Do we stand still or do we go with it? That's the question we face just now. International institutions, whether it's the EU or the multinational institutions of the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, all in a state of flux, wanting to understand what their role is. We have an opportunity to be part of how we define that. Since our chair was born, roughly 150 countries have entered the community of nations in the world. That's a trend we could be part of. It's unusual, isn't it, that none of them have decided to go back the way. A natural part of the globalising process is that power, while it has been shared by more and more countries as we internationalise and cooperate, is also being driven as close to the people as possible. And compared to those 150 countries, when they made their choice, Scotland today is richer than any one of them, is better prepared than any one of them in terms of the institutions we already have in place, and despite what we think, has more information at our disposal than any one of those 150 countries. So just imagine What we have is the opportunity now, compared to the lessons of history of 150 countries who have blazed a trail for us. And what are we seeking to change? We are seeking to change the UK state, which specifically is government from Westminster and Whitehall. We're not seeking to change the cultural, social, economic and other ties that bind the United Kingdom or Britain, but we are wanting to change how we do politics. We have a UK state which has one of the largest deficits and debt positions of any developed country. We have an institutional crisis almost everywhere you look inside Britain. It's unsure of its role in the world, which is why the biggest threat, as Ian raised the EU, the biggest threat to Scotland being in the EU is not how we vote in this referendum, because everyone accepts we will remain in the EU at the end of the process. The biggest threat to Scotland being in the EU, the biggest threat to Scotland remaining in the EU is a referendum on getting out, channelled to us from Westminster. We have a totally unsustainable situation in the United Kingdom just now on every front, which is why we have the rise of UKIP and dissatisfaction with our institutions. I call in evidence, however, the single most boring document ever published by the Office for National Statistics, which is this one here, on Regional Gross Value Added Income Approach, December 2013. The reason I raise this is because what it shows is that the United Kingdom has an unsustainable economic model. If the UK's performance is 100, London is 174, Wales is 72, West Midlands 82, North East 75, way behind, Scotland just under the average, and incidentally the most average of any UK region or nation, not counting the impact of North Sea oil. What you have, and you won't be able to read the detail of this, but what this shows is the performance, which you can make out the picture, since Labour's election in 1997, and what it shows is London and the South East have powered ahead when every other region and nation in the UK have fallen behind. That's the model we have at the moment, and it is unsustainable. The impact of this on social welfare, on economic performance, is not good enough and has to change. The gap between the richest place in Britain, which is Mayfair, possibly familiar to our chair, certainly not familiar to the rest of us, I'm sure, and the Wirral, which is the poorest part of the UK on GVA per head, is the largest gap between any two regions of any country in the European Union at present. It's 5 times bigger than the gap equivalent in Sweden, Denmark, Austria, and other progressive parts of the European Union. It's much bigger than France and Germany as well. We live in a remarkably unequal country with a remarkably unsustainable model. So standing still in this storm, international and domestic, is no option. Voting no is the equivalent of being a frog sat in a pot of water waiting for it to boil. There is one outcome in the process. It might feel comfortable now, but there is one outcome in the process, and we have to change it. We got devolution. It's now some time since I was first elected, and that was a step forward, but we lack the financial accountability and controls that a normal parliament would have. All is changing, as I say, and the question for us tonight is who leads that change? We elected in my lifetime the government in Westminster roughly 40% of the time. In a good year, their focus will be 1/12 on the interests of Scotland. Do we choose that to lead us through stormy waters, or do we choose a government that we elect every time, focused on the Scottish interest every day? As for Edinburgh, the question here is, do we have power administered from Whitehall and Westminster, or do we do it from here and other parts of Scotland? The opportunities for this city are obvious to anyone who thinks them through. The capital city benefits are remarkable, and if we show ambition, we could become the true economic capital of North Britain, rather than just North Britons in name. No borders required to be erected other than policy ones. Lots of the institutions can be shared. No one will be a foreigner to anyone else. Only the politics and the power will shift. Well, if you giggle, if you want to think that you'll be foreign to someone else, go ahead. That's not the vision the Yes campaign is articulating. And let's think about what is no. No is can't. No is we can't move from A to B, no matter how great B is. If we had invented the light bulb and were putting that proposition today, no would be saying, just think of the hassle of rewiring Britain, of rewiring the houses. Just imagine all the gas lamp lighters who would lose their job. They're not thinking about the possibilities and the opportunity of transforming the country for the better. No is a deficit that is unsustainable being used as the reason not to move. No is a demographic time bomb being used as a reason not to move. No is saying that pensions are not funded, and that's a good thing. No is emotion behind the idea of Britishness rather than pragmatism about redesigning the relationship across these islands. So just as you can be Scottish and vote no, and you can be a proud Scot and vote no, I assure you, so you can feel British and vote yes. Britishness is not about Whitehall and Westminster, it's about a whole heap more than that. So don't buy the emotional lie that you can't be British and vote yes. Our ties are so strong across these islands. We've been through so much together for so long, smited so many enemies in the course of the last 300 years. The idea that we can't reconstitute a monetary and financial and economic union but drive power closer to the people is an absurdity. Of course, we're capable of it. And finally, I would suggest it's a personal choice that we face. It's the decision collectively made by millions of individuals. And I would urge all of us, when we reflect on what we face in a few weeks' time, to do so with a sense of era, not moment, to think beyond the immediate as to what's going to happen over the course of the coming months and years, and above all else, to trust yourself. If I can close, Chairman, on a quote from an American you may not have heard of, but with some wisdom that is worth reflecting on. The future is not a place we are going, but one we are creating. The paths are not to be found, but made, and the activity of making them changes both the maker and the destination. I put it to you that this is the single most exciting moment in our country's history. It's a democratic moment of empowerment. It's one we can make with consensus, and no matter what the outcome, we must come together and make this country as great as it can be. I've got high ambition for Scotland, and we know from history that the higher the expectations we place on ourselves, the higher the performance always. The reason I stand here arguing this case is that I'm tired of my country lacking ambition to achieve what could be a remarkable potential. Believe in yourself, focus on the positive, reject passivity, and take control of what's next. Thank you very much.
Andrew Wilson. And by the way, as the debate's going on, feel free to tweet away, those of you who are tweeters. The hashtag is SpecScot, and there are already lots of people joining in the debate. Even people who are not here are joining in the debate from various parts of the United Kingdom, indeed from various parts of the world. I'm monitoring them as we come in here. We've already managed, I think, to upset the Welsh and maybe a few others as well. The second speaker tonight for the motion is the former leader of the Scottish Conservatives. Please welcome Annabel Goldie.
Andrew, ladies and gentlemen, can I echo what has been said? It's a great pleasure to be with you this evening on such an important occasion. Now, I have to share with you that when I read this motion, I felt a huge sense of relief. You see, I had previously thought the greatest threat to Edinburgh was that hoydens like me from the West were in danger of coming through and colonialising Morningside, and this was something Edinburgh could not bear to think about. So I was greatly relieved to find that risk has been usurped by another. And I have to say that when I read the motion and saw the superlative, the greatest threat, I thought, greatest threat? You know, not a threat or a considerable threat, the greatest threat? Is that since last year or since the start of the festival or famously since Edinburgh was charged with powdering her nose and forgetting to wipe her bottom? Or was it perhaps since 1707, the commencement of the Union? And if Edinburgh is the only subject of such a threat, what about the rest of us? And I looked at what some of our eminent Scots of former times had to say. Robert Burns, Edina, Scotia's darling seat. And Robert Louis Stevenson of Edinburgh, this profusion of eccentricities, this dream and masonry and living rock is not a drop scene in a theatre, but a city in the world of reality. And I thought that was a pretty good point from which to start this debate, because I'm going to interpret the motion inclusively. Edinburgh is Scotland's capital city, and a reference to her is a reference to Scotland, and I'm going to take my starting point to 1707, the genesis of a quite extraordinary, a unique social, economic, and political union. And let me be clear about what this decision in September is not about, ladies and gentlemen. It is not about, can Scotland be independent? Of course Scotland can be independent. The question is much more pressing. It is, which is the better arrangement for Scotland? Independence or staying within the partnership of the United Kingdom? And the 18th of September is also not about who is the better, more patriotic Scot. All of us, on both sides of the argument, want the best for our country, and let us all remember that. And what this is also not about on the 18th of September is a choice between independence and no change. If we decide to say no thanks to the offering of independence, to the unanswered questions, to the risk and uncertainty, if we decide to say no thanks to that, change will follow. Change will follow with an already strong Scottish Parliament being given additional powers. And I would argue, in support of the motion tonight, that that is a very attractive option for Scotland, being part of this important partnership which is the United Kingdom, and yet with our Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh being able to honour, preserve and nourish our distinctive culture in Scotland, our distinctive institutions, our different legal system, our different way of delivering the NHS, our different way of providing education. And we do that differently within the Scottish Parliament, and I think that is an important imprimatur on everything that we regard as distinctively Scottish. But let me just dwell briefly on this partnership of the United Kingdom, because I would argue that that partnership has been actually very important for Scotland, because, as others have said, it has enabled us to pool resource. It has enabled us in Scotland to maximise opportunity. And yes, it has enabled us, when times have been tough, to stand shoulder to shoulder and share that burden of risk. And that is the best attribute of any partnership. And I think that if you pause to reflect what we've achieved within that partnership, together we fought against and defeated Nazism. Together we have fought against and continue to fight against terrorism. Within that partnership we have a global influence. We are one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. We are an important and influential member of NATO. We are one of the top 3 countries in the EU, along with France and Germany. We are in the G7 and G8 groups of countries. And no matter, ladies and gentlemen, how well an independent Scotland might be led, we cannot replicate that sphere of influence on the international stage. And I've been very struck, speaking to many, many school children, how often these youngsters seem to favour remaining within the United Kingdom. And I think one of the reasons is, in their world, they see this age as a global age. The 21st century is nothing if it is not a global age. And they don't think this is a time to be thinking smaller, retreating behind borders. They think this is a time to remain absolutely plugged into these international tables of influence in a meaningful sense. And that brings me to another aspect of this partnership, defence. Now, I come from the west of Scotland. I grew up very near the Clyde. I used to watch regular naval manoeuvres on the Clyde. I live across the water on the other side of the Clyde from Fastlane. And I have to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that you won't find too many people in the west of Scotland thinking that Fastlane and our current defence capability within the UK is unimportant. You will find many of these people taking the view that actually underpins our international influence. That actually gives us clout. Not in some colonialist, imperialist sense, but it gives us clout that if we need with our allies, our democratic allies, to try and assist in time of need and protect our own countries within the United Kingdom, we have the defence capability to do that. We have the 4th biggest defence budget in the world. With the best will in the world, independent Scotland cannot replicate that. And can I also say, in the context of this international influence, that I happen to think that matters. I did a debate, I remember, once with Nicola Sturgeon, and I was being castigated for my holding the views I do, very much in the vein of what Andrew Wilson was talking about. And I had to say to Nicola and her Yes campaign compadre, look, you may think it's unimportant in this global age. We are able, within the United Kingdom, to be part of that international sphere of authority and be able to influence in that important manner. You may think that doesn't matter. I said, I couldn't disagree with you more. In this day and age, that's where Scotland with the United Kingdom needs to be. And I am completely unconvinced by the argument that thinking smaller, becoming smaller, being a country, masters of our own domain within our boundaries, but not plugged into these important areas. I'm completely unconvinced that in this day and age, that is where Scotland wants to be. I think Scotland needs to be within the strong partnership. And can I say, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, that the more I examine the campaign for independence, the more I see an argument which is littered with unanswered questions, fraught with uncertainty. I do not want to lose the pound, I want to keep the pound. I do not want to be uncertain about our powerful position in the EU. I believe in the EU, and I think the EU needs reformed. I want to be in it. I think it would be difficult for the UK if we weren't in it. And I think a lot of people take that view. I think for independent Scotland, it would be extremely difficult to have a significant position within the EU. We don't know what the terms would be for admission. We don't know whether we'd have to join the euro. We don't know whether we'd lose the rebate. More uncertainty, more unanswered questions. And when I also think of the questions that arise in relation to where we'd be in NATO, what's the point? What's our defence facility for as an independent Scotland? As far as I can see, basically it would be to protect North Sea oil interests and North Sea fishing interests. Well, if that's the case, why on earth would you headquarter your navy round in the Clyde? Sail up Lament along the Pentland Firth before you even get within striking distance of where the scene of activity is that you're strategically trying to protect. So I just don't think the argument for independence adds up. And in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I would say to you that I think Scotland benefits, and I didn't recognise Andrew Wilson's dismal description of Scotland today. I think Scotland is a terrific country. I'm proud of it. Born here, educated here, worked here, partner in my law firm here, privileged to serve in the Scottish Parliament. I couldn't be prouder of my country. And I think good things are happening to Scotland at the moment. And I think a large part of that is because we are within the United Kingdom, not in spite of the United Kingdom. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the future I want for my country, a vibrant, a confident future, I see us having enjoying that future for Scotland with the strength, the stability and the security of the United Kingdom. And I'm not going to trade that for the risk and uncertainty of independence. Ladies and gentlemen, I support the motion. I invite you, for the sake of your country, to do the same.
Annabel Goldie. And now we move to our second speaker tonight against the motion. She is a founding member of Women for Independence. Please welcome Jeane Freeman.
Thank you very much. And as a Glaswegian in particular, albeit I did live here for 13 years, thanks very much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very pleased to take part in this debate. And like my colleagues, I want to contend that the greatest threat to this capital city is to remain part of the United Kingdom. And before I elaborate on the case I want to put before you, I want to say a couple of things about what the independence debate is not. It's not about political parties. It's not about which parties we vote for at elections at various times. It's not about flags or Bannockburn or Braveheart or who's more Scottish or who's more proud than whom. It's about none of those things. It is about both our heads, most importantly, a wee bit of our hearts, and deciding which choice we think offers us as individuals, as members of families, as people with kids growing up and with grandchildren, as members of this society, what choices offers us the best way forward. And yes, the economy, particularly in this city, is improving, and it's improving here faster than anywhere else in Scotland. Employment is rising here, new businesses are being created in Edinburgh, and existing ones are growing. House prices and house sales are rising in this city. But this is also a city that is in the top quartile of income-deprived people in Scotland. This is a city where the number of food banks has grown from 3 in 2012 to 8 in only 1 year, with the number of people using those food banks rising by 2/3. And a city where last December, 2,000 children got their Christmas dinner from those food banks. So this is also a city that is part of a country which has the largest wage gap between men and women in Western Europe, the highest childcare and transport costs, pensioners who are the poorest in Europe, and a country in the United Kingdom where child poverty is rising. Why is that? We have heard, we've read, no one really argues, that we are part of the richest, we are one of the richest countries in Western Europe here in Scotland. We're rich in natural resources. We're rich in industry, in commerce, in education. We've heard that already. In life sciences, in engineering, in food and drink, in enterprise and creative industries. And most of all, we are rich in the talent, the energy, and the education of the people of Scotland. We are one of the highest and best educated populations in Western Europe. But as part of the United Kingdom, we are part of the fourth most unequal country in Western Europe. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because of the choices a UK government makes. And not only this current one, the previous one, the Labour government, made comparable choices, and we read that a future Labour government would make exactly the same choices. For 34 of the last 68 years, decisions have been made about Scotland by governments that Scotland rejected at the ballot box. That matters. It matters not just because, and not even because, we're peeved, we're in a huff. It matters because those decisions made by those UK governments that Scotland rejected affect our lives every single day. Child benefit cuts that 89% of Scots MPs voted against. A bedroom tax that 91% of Scottish MPs voted against. Public sector pension changes that 81% of Scottish MPs voted against. But all of them still endured, suffered by people in Scotland, leading to those food banks, leading to those children, rising numbers of children in poverty. Because of this. Because people will say, but Jeane, you run education, you run health, you run justice, and so on. But do you know, we could have in Scotland the best school education system that we could possibly devise. The largest numbers of teachers, the most energetic, committed numbers of teachers, the best school buildings. But if that child goes to school hungry, then that child will not make the best use of those opportunities. If that child goes to that school upset because mum and dad are arguing about what to do about granny, because the UK government has decided that she lives in a home with one bedroom too many, a home that she brought her children up in, a home that she had her marital life in, then that child will not make the best use of those educational opportunities. So what happens in terms of welfare, taxation, economic growth matters to how well we can deliver a good education system, a good health service, the best transport possibilities, and most importantly, underneath all of that, economic growth. So that history of UK governments being rejected by Scots at the ballot box, but whose policies are imposed on this country, matters in terms of the kind of society and future that we live in. And let me just say a word in the passing about universities. Our universities in Scotland, and we do actually have the first university ever created in the United Kingdom. Our universities are indeed amongst the top 200 in the world. We have more research citations per head of population than anywhere else in the world. Our universities' research and their capacity to continue research post-independence is not based on the fact that we are part of a United Kingdom. It's based on the quality of the brains inside those universities and the quality of the research they do. Research is international. Collaboration on research is international. And the Research Council and others, including another group of university principals and academics, have said independence will not halt the growth of academic capacity, contribution, and ability. So along with many other things, this notion that the sky will fall in and the world will end in our academic institutions if we vote for independence is nonsense. Our universities, our research, our capacity to be enterprising and to contribute to the economic growth of our country will remain and, in my view, will grow with the powers of independence. Now, if you live in Edinburgh, this rich, vibrant and incredibly beautiful city, and you're in work, you're being paid reasonably well, you're looking ahead and beginning to feel a bit more confident about your own future and the future of your children, why would any of this matter to you? Why would it matter that your food banks have grown, that the number of people using them are growing, that you have problems of alcohol abuse and drug abuse, that you have a large number of income-deprived people amongst you? It matters because we're wasting talent, we're wasting energy, we're wasting ability. All of those people excluded are excluded from contributing. And if we could harness what they have to offer us, then we harness all the capacity that Scotland has to grow. But it also matters because a society where people are excluded is a society that in the end will not function. It will not function. Each and every one of us, we don't break the law, we do the best we can, we work hard. We do that partly because we believe it is the right thing to do, partly also, though, because we have a stake in our society. Too many people in Scotland don't have that stake, and it's time that we used all the powers of a normal country, of a normal parliament, to begin to make the kind of choices that brought them back into the society that you and I enjoy, that they can have a stake in it too. So staying as we are is, for me, the risk to this city and to this country. What are we looking forward to? We're looking forward to continued austerity, to UK governments that, no matter how the votes are cast in Scotland, will be a revolving door of Tory, Labour, Lib Dem, UKIP, per many too, out of that lot. A revolving door that they have told us will, as I said, continue austerity, continue to cut welfare, continue with an economic focus that is primarily on the southeast of England, closing doors and turning faces away from welcoming people to our shores who want to contribute their talent, their education, their ability to what this country has to offer. Staying as we are will create a narrow, inward-looking, me-first country. It is not the internationalist, open-door country that Annabel talks about. Because, you know, as a small country, we can have international impact. The difference is, with the powers of a parliament, we choose what kind of international impact we want to have. So a vote for independence is a vote that offers us choices. Choices we don't have right now. Choices for this city and for this country. There's not going to be any fairy dust after independence. There will be a lot of hard work. But the decisions will be ours to make. The choices will be ours to determine. So my argument is this. We know we can be independent. Let's have confidence in ourselves, trust in ourselves, to vote yes and build our country anew.
Jeane Freeman. And our third speaker tonight for the motion is a former member of the House of Commons for Glasgow Hill Head, now a Respect member of the House of Commons for Bradford West. Please welcome George Galloway.
Andrew, in 1974, when I joined the campaign for Home Rule for Scotland, people said such a parliament would be dominated by Edinburgh lawyers and Glasgow councillors. To which I answered it could be worse. It could be dominated by Glasgow lawyers and Edinburgh councillors. And so it in a way has. Every single thing that Jeane Freeman said there that was good could be done now, right now, and could have been done over the last 7 years that the SNP have been in power. And she says it's not about any individual party. She'll tell us if she can that she's not in the SNP, though she worked for Alex Salmond. But that's a distinction without a difference. Because if Scotland votes yes in September, you will be handing the prize which for 100 years the SNP have fought for. They fought for it despite everything and anything that was happening. When London was burning under the Blitz, their poet laureate MacDiarmid said, "London is burning, I don't care." They said it was England's war. They want you to refight a battle 700 years ago between two French-speaking kings with Scottish people on both sides. I prefer to remember a rather more recent battle when this small island of English-speaking people stood alone, and if we had not stood but capitulated like others had done before us, we'd be having this meeting this evening in German, if we were going to have it at all. And not one person asked in that summer and autumn of 1940 and into 1941 if the pilots who were spinning above us, defending us from invasion, from the barbaric horde, asked whether the pilot was from Suffolk or from Sutherland. We were people together on a small piece of rock with 300 years of common history. And that's what they want to break up. And all the rest is balderdash. That's the truth of it. They want to, you see, as Jeane was talking, for women, for independence, I got to wondering, how come so few women are in favour of independence? Why are Scotland's women the most resistant of all the demographics in this contest? And the reason is women don't like gambling. And everything in their project is about gambling for your future, your pension, your children and their children's future. And you're right not to like gambling. I'm one of the only members of Parliament who voted against the creation of a national lottery. I'm so against it. The national lottery is funding to the tune of millions the SNP's campaign to break up the country. But just a few hundred yards from here, on the North Bridge, one of Scotland's women, one of our most achieving women, one of our most famous women in the history of our entire country, J.K. Rowling, sat in a cafe and wrote books that people all over the world love. And what happened when she dared to opine as to how people should vote in September? You see, Andrew, they've sent the nice team along tonight. Independence is not really that dramatic, you know, you can still be British, even though they want to break up Britain. Last night in Cope Bridge, the Rough House, they had the pit boots on. Andrew called us frogs. That's not what they were calling me last night. And it's not what they called J.K. Rowling either. She was subjected to a torrent of abuse and hatred online and in the post. And that's the second reason why women don't like independence. Because they can see that it has already generated and will generate a politics of grudge and division based on where one stood. I am tired of being called a quisling or a traitor, or as I was ordered last night from the rougher end of Andrew's trade, get back to England. I'll go wherever I like in these islands or anywhere else and speak my mind. And you see, that's the authentic voice of those who wish to break up this country. I have only a few minutes left. Let me make this point. I've been divorced more than once. Trust me, it's never, ever amicable, whatever anybody tells you. But you can make a deal. You can give the partner who's walking out on you all the CDs, the DVDs, the dog, the car. You can give them everything, but the one thing you will never, ever give them is the right to continue to use the joint credit card. But that's what their plan A, and they have no plan B, amounts to. They want to use a currency issued by the Bank of England, the clue being in the name. They want to continue to use it, and they imagine that the people who issue it will allow them to do so, to use the joint credit card, even though and as they're walking out the door. So, this is the first time ever that people in a small country where everyone speaks the same language are being asked to break up. And break up on the basis that they don't have a currency to use. There will be no pound. Trust me on that. I came yesterday from Parliament. The leaders of the mainstream parties have not changed their mind. An independent Scotland will not have the pound. What will it have instead? The euro, how's that going? MD, fancy that? Or are we going to bring back the groat? I see one or two pensioners here, or people close to pensionable age. How do you fancy your pension in groats? How do you fancy a pension that's based entirely on the absolutely unstable price of a commodity that will be finished in 2050? I'm older than I look, but in my lifetime, oil has been as low as $9 a barrel and as high as $156 a barrel. Who wants to mortgage their children and their children's future on a finite resource that will soon be finished and the price of which is simply uncalculable? Uncalculable. There'll be havoc if you vote yes in September. Havoc in Edinburgh and throughout the land. And you'll break the hearts of many others too. Because, and here as I look at my fellow debaters on my side, I was reminded of the Duke of Wellington reviewing his own troops before the Battle of Waterloo. I don't know what they do to the enemy, but they don't half frighten me. The difference is we have come together but temporarily at a moment of national peril. The nationalists, on the other hand, are permanently together, for they have only one purpose: to persuade you that Brian Souter, the gay-baiting billionaire funder of their campaign, is someone more worthy of looking up to than J.K. Rowling. I know which side I'm on. I'm with J.K. Rowling. Just say no. Thanks very much.
George Galloway. George Galloway. And the third speaker tonight against the motion is the Chief Executive of the Yes Scotland campaign. Please welcome Blair Jenkins.
Yes, how do you follow that? I think one of the best known things about George Galloway is he's very famously teetotal. Throughout his long political career, he has never succumbed to the attractions of alcohol. One does sometimes wonder what he might come out with if he did like a drink. Ladies and gentlemen, I think, like all great ideas, the idea of Scottish independence is basically a very straightforward idea. The best people to take decisions about what is right for the people of Scotland are the people of Scotland. Everything flows from that basic position. Now, we know that for sure, from all the areas where we already have decision-making powers, that we get it right for Scotland, particularly in key areas like education policy and health policy. With independence, all the big decisions, all the decisions that affect our daily lives will be taken here in Scotland and not at Westminster. I believe we all want, I include everyone else who's speaking tonight, I believe we all want Scotland to succeed. I believe we all want Scotland to fulfil its potential as a country and as a society. We haven't been doing that in Scotland for a long time. So we have to view this independence referendum as an amazing opportunity. It's not just, as Annabel said, it's not just that we can afford to be an independent country. It's that we are a country of extraordinary resources. Lots of wealth, lots of talent. We can do much better than we're doing right now. It's been said repeatedly during this referendum debate, and never challenged, that Scotland will be better positioned and better prepared to become an independent country than any other nation that's become independent in the last 100 years. That's something that should give us great confidence in this very important year, making this very important decision. Now, I take part in a lot of discussions and a lot of debates, and I'm probably coming to the view that there are probably too many numbers bandied about in the independence debate. So let me just focus on a few of the ones I think that matter. First, everyone now agrees that Scotland, on current figures, is a top 20 country in terms of its economic output, higher up that particular league table than France, Japan, or indeed the rest of the UK right now. It doesn't feel that way because, as Jeane so eloquently explained, that wealth is unfairly distributed. We are a wealthy country, but not a wealthy society. Secondly, there were, as Andrew said, about 50 independent countries at the end of the Second World War. There are now about 200. The long-term trend internationally is that of self-determination by smaller nations. We are doing nothing unusual here in Scotland. And finally, on these numbers, 7 of the top 10 economies in the developed world right now are countries that are a similar size or smaller than Scotland. These countries also do better in the health and happiness league tables. So those are all, I think, interesting and important numbers. But I do believe that very often the things that matter most in life are the things that you can't measure. And I believe that becoming an independent country would release a great energy and determination in Scotland, a determination to tackle our problems and to take our opportunities in a way that we haven't done in the past. Now, that energy is not captured in any of the various predictive economic models that are around, nor is the greater international profile that an independent Scotland, and indeed Edinburgh, would enjoy, nor is the great goodwill which I believe would be there for our newly independent country. We know for at least 30 years the direction of travel of the UK has not been the direction that Scotland would have taken. We regularly get governments we don't vote for and policies that we reject. The way that wealth in the UK is shared is impossible to justify and does not match our expectations of a fair society. About 80% of us in polls think that inequality is far too high. The share of our national income held by the top 1% of the population has doubled in the last 30 years, from 6% to 14%. So the top 1% in this country have a greater share of national income than in any other developed country except the United States. And that's not coincidence, that's not something that's happened by chance, because for many years now, the model preferred by UK governments has been the United States model to the West European model of how to run an economy and a society. The money and wealth held by that richest 1% is equal to the total wealth of the bottom 55% in society in the UK. We know that wealth inequalities lead to dreadful health inequalities, lead to educational inequalities. I think in Scotland there is a very profound sense of disappointment and disillusion with the politics that emanate from Westminster and that determine our priorities as a country. It's a bit like feeling you're living someone else's life. Currently, in all areas to do with social justice, as contrary to what George said, in all the areas to do with social justice, Westminster has the power, it just doesn't have the willpower. I believe in Scotland we have the ideas and the commitment, and with independence we will have the powers to tackle inequality. As a friend of mine, Jerry Hassan, has said, we need for the very first time seriously to address the scale of poverty and exclusion in Scotland, and we need to prioritise the life chances of our children. Now, we've seen in this referendum campaign that all the ideas and all the energy in this debate are on the yes side. We have lots of progressive opinion and discussion, passionate manifestos from very different perspectives. I think that's a strength of the yes campaign, its diversity. It's not a weakness, it's a strength. I believe also that we see very real and very tantalising glimpses of what an independent Scotland would be like, the kind of society we would be. Much is made, and Annabel touched on this, a lot is made of the need for certainty about what will happen in the future. But to be honest, neither campaign can meet that demand. This decision is not about somebody giving you certainty about the future. It's about you yourself having the confidence to decide what your future is going to be. And I think it's true, if we stay in the UK, there are certainly some certainties. The certainty of growing poverty, the certainty of inequality, the certainty of expensive weapons of mass destruction on the Clyde that we don't need, the certainty of future Tory governments and policies like the bedroom tax, the certainty of opportunity lost and hope denied. Yes is the option that provides opportunity, and I believe will make a difference. We will be a country eagerly searching for international partnerships, eagerly embracing international friendships. So I would invite everybody here tonight to imagine a better Scotland. Imagine the first election to an independent Scottish Parliament in May 2016, not so very far away. The parties will be competing with their policies on growing the economy, fair wages and taxation, stronger social protection. For the first time, we will have a complete set of policies designed in Scotland and for Scotland, using all of the levers of government. And that independent government will sit right here in Edinburgh, a real capital city. I believe that although the question in this referendum is a very short one, should Scotland be an independent country, behind that short question lies a much longer series of questions. It is about what are our top values and priorities, what do we think is really important, what are we passionate about, what do we care about, what kind of society do we want to create for our children and future generations. The movement, the momentum in this campaign is towards yes. I believe that's because as people ask themselves these questions, these very important questions, and think about the two possible outcomes in September, they realise that a yes outcome is more likely to produce the kind of Scotland that they want. Thank you very much.
Blair Jenkins. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the arguments for and against from the three sides. This is how you voted on the way in. For the motion, 119, against the motion, 27, and don't knows 36. I think to say there's all to play for may have been an exaggeration, but there are 36 don't knows up there for grabs, and people have been known to change their minds as well. We have microphones in the hall. We're ready to take some questions from the floor. There's a gentleman right at the back in the blue shirt. Keep your hand up. Let me see another hand. We'll get a microphone to you. And the lady in black there, straight in front of me. We get the microphone to you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to reply to just one of the schoolboy howlers from the first yes speaker, who I think was Fred the Shred spin doctor, so maybe it's just to be expected. But you were talking about Europe. In fact, the SNP and UKIP policies are almost identical. Leaving the union, blaming the foreigners in the union that you're leaving behind, and keeping the pound. But actually, it's a statistical myth. It's a myth. It's not backed up by the statistics to say that the Scottish people are so much more pro-European than anyone else in the rest of the UK. As per now, we've got the UKIP MP in Scotland kind of to prove it. But I certainly don't think that Scotland is so pro-European that we'll end a national union of over 300 years just to avoid the possibility of maybe being consulted about whether to stay in the EU or not, especially since the EU, when it takes only one veto, and Spain and Belgium as well and Italy, but certainly Spain would very much want to use that veto, we wouldn't even be getting into the EU.
All right.
So we'd be leaving two unions in order to suck up to one and beg to be allowed in.
All right. What was the question?
It was a response. Sorry. My question is, what do you say to that?
Andrew Wilson, what do you say to that?
I'd say I disagree. I think it's a shame you feel you have to play the man, not the ball, generally in politics, and that goes for Mr. Galloway, I think, across the most of his speech.
Well, tell us about Fred the Shred, why don't you? I mean, you were his spin doctor, why don't you tell us about him? Let's play the man. Let's play the man that helped destroy the whole economic basis of this country and took us over the brink. So I wouldn't attack the young man if I was you. I'd gloss over the Fred the Shred thing as quickly as possible. That's my advice, as your spin doctor.
All right. Andrew Wilson?
I, along with 250,000 other people, worked at Royal Bank of Scotland in a decade. None of us are happy with what happened, and none of us are entirely responsible for it, George. And I think, I would ask that this debate is conducted with a touch more respect. I think you go under a party that preaches it and don't conduct it. On the material point that's been put, the real risk to Scotland in terms of its European Union membership is a referendum on getting out from Westminster. And if you can't see that, you can't see.
But the young man's question, though, was that the polls suggest that in terms of attitudes to Europe, that there's not that much difference in Scotland to the rest of the UK. What do you say to that?
Well, it's actually a point that's very quickly corrected, because the most recent, very detailed bit of work on that was done right here in Edinburgh by the Constitutional Study Unit at Edinburgh University, and it showed a very significant difference in attitudes in Scotland to EU membership as compared to England. There was a majority in favour of continued EU membership in Scotland, and currently, and that might not be the case after a debate and a referendum.
But there's a majority in favour of EU membership in the UK.
Well, no, in the work done here, it went the other way. The work showed that more people were against EU membership than in favour of EU membership.
But all the recent polls, YouGov, Populus, Ipsos Mori, all show not just a majority for staying in the EU, but actually a growing majority for staying in the EU, in the UK. So what's the difference?
Well, the difference is, as I say, in the constitutional study, a poll was,
How many
was
people
quite
did
defined.
they poll?
It's a very large study, and I don't know, maybe someone here from the unit, I don't know. It's possible.
Lady in Black.
I would like to have some details answered. And first of all, given that the Scottish oil and gas was found during UK times, is it correct that we will only receive the revenue proportionate to the population of Scotland, i.e. 8%, for which there is international precedence? The other question I have, given that I am an EU passport holder and not a British citizen, what's going to happen to me on the 19th of September? This country will have ceased to be part of Europe, and therefore, am I going to be chucked out? As an independent taxpayer since 26 years, will I have to ask for a residency permit? Nobody so far has answered that question.
I take it, Blair Jenkins, that anybody with an EU passport is not going to be chucked out, whatever the result is.
Well, no, I mean, people who have EU passports are voting in the referendum and will be staying in Scotland after a yes vote. I should also say, on your other point, I don't even think on the No campaign it's any longer suggested that Scotland would be coming out of the European Union. I think it is conceded now and accepted. No. That the negotiation of new terms and conditions would be from a position of continuing to be part of the European Union.
That's just not right.
Accepted.
Annabel Goldie.
I mean, this is just part of the sort of gloss that is daubed liberally over every argument. There is a wheen of constitutional legal expert now saying.
There's a what?
Wheen.
What's a loads? What's a wheen?
A lot.
An old Paisley. I always thought Greenwich Academy was better than Paisley Grammar, and now I know
Clearly better at making up words no one understands. But carry on.
There's an overwhelming volume of legal opinion from constitutional legal experts, but also from EU experts saying, no, Scotland will have to become a new member state negotiating entry. And we have no idea what conditions will attach to our admission if we are admitted, because as the gentleman up there quite rightly said, there is a right of veto by every other member state.
But could it not negotiate its membership as an independent country while kind of treading water in de facto remaining inside the EU?
They're not a member of the EU, that's the problem. The membership lands with the United Kingdom. They are the member of
the UK is the member state
of the European Union.
Professor Charlie Jeffrey of Edinburgh University, who may or may not be in the audience, I don't know, said after Mr Barroso's remarks back at the beginning of the year, the rushing noise after Mr Barroso said that Scotland would be applying from outside was the rush of every independent expert coming out to disagree with him and say that he was wrong. Charlie Jeffrey made the point that virtually every independent expert on this point agrees that there is no provision in any European treaty for Scotland to leave the European Union. Scotland will have to negotiate its new terms and conditions in continuing membership. The people and territory of Scotland cannot be excluded from the EU. There is no mechanism.
Is that what the Scottish Government's official legal advice says?
I've no idea.
No, exactly.
I've no idea.
Well, Andrew, can I just make that point? That's a crucial point that you've made, because you uncovered that in your interview with the First Minister about 18 months ago, that they spend £150,000 of Scottish taxpayers' money trying to hide evidence they didn't have. If they do have legal evidence that says that Scotland would remain in the EU while they're renegotiating their membership terms, then they should just publish it. If they don't, they should get it. And the reason they won't is because they don't want to know the answer.
What's the answer to that, Andrew Wilson?
Well, it's not they, it's we, and we won't be independent the day after the referendum, no matter what we vote. It will take a period of time. So I would ask you just to have a calm head and consider the evidence that's in front of you. No one who is reasonable really thinks that the B that we are trying to ask you to imagine is Scotland out with the EU. Tons of people are lining up to say there's reasons why we can't get there. I put it to you that if East Germany could enter the European Union in 3 months on the reunification of Germany in the fall of the former Soviet bloc, then we can renegotiate in a matter of weeks.
Andrew, that's a key point.
They were coming from out with the European Union. We're coming from within
East
it.
Germany going in the opposite
It was going in the opposite direction. It was going Andrew, we hear this all the time. Let's just nail this now.
That's the whole point.
We hear this all the time. We need to
Scotland
nail this myth. Germany, the reason East Germany was able to secede into Germany was because Germany held the membership of the European Union and East Germany joined them. We're talking about a separation in the opposite direction. It's a total myth.
What do you think's more
George
difficult?
Galloway, I'll take you and then we'll get some more questions from the floor.
It all sounds like a bit of a gamble, right? Maybe's aye, maybe's no. You ready for that? You ready for a future where maybe's aye, maybe's no, you'll have a currency? Maybe's aye, maybe's no, you'll be in the European Union. What kind of nutter would vote for that? I mean, really, what kind of nutter would vote for that kind of a gamble? And I'll tell you something, the one European country, the one I know best, Spain, will veto any attempt by Scotland to join the European Union for 2 big reasons. One of them is Catalonia, and the other is the Basque Country. If you think any country that is threatened by separatist breakaway is going to encourage separation and breakaway by granting automatic membership of the European Union, then frankly, you've got another thing coming.
I'm afraid that's rhetoric and not reality. The Spanish government have made it clear that they did not see what happens in the Scottish referendum as setting any kind of precedent for Spain.
Right.
All right.
It's a different set of constitutional arrangements. It's not a precedent or a parallel for them. They've made this very clear.
Okay, thank you. There's a lady straight in front of me, the microphone there. We didn't actually answer your question about the oil, did we? No. Well, can we just briefly do that? Andrew Wilson, it's not right, is it, that the oil, however it's divided up post a yes vote, it wouldn't be on population basis, would it?
No, I don't think so. I think the precedence in most countries where this has taken place is that it's along the grounds of where the existing legal administration and jurisdiction lies.
I mean, you're assuming you'll get most of it, or nearly all of it.
I don't think there's an independent oil expert that would say we would get much less than 90% as things lies, because most of the disputed territories were in the middle of the North Sea, and they're dry now. Most of the areas that are coming on stream are way beyond any doubt.
All right.
What about Orkney and Shetland? Is it not their oil?
All right.
Yeah.
The lady there, and let me say there's another, and the gentleman there with the beard. Yes.
Hi. Again, Germany. I lived in Germany in the 90s and I paid 63% unification tax. Why did Germany want to become a nation of 80 million rather than what they were before? And how have they fared in this economic crisis? And the second point is, Germany has 16 independent states with 16 prime ministers. I lived in Bavaria for a big part of the time. I could never imagine Bavaria wanting to have a referendum to leave Deutschland. What is the logic of us wanting to go the opposite way and become a state of 5 million in the current economic crisis, or the so-called crisis that's been depicted? That's what I don't understand in this debate, and I don't understand.
Can I take that as a rhetorical question? Because I think the tone of your voice answered it for yourself. There, yes, the gentleman over there.
Thank you. Annabel Goldie told us with certainty that things will change after a no vote in terms of devolution and greater tax-raising powers and control over our own resources. Us Scots are a very sceptical nation, and in 1979 Alec Douglas-Home said something rather similar, and nothing happened. Now, we have had three party leaders agreeing that something will happen, but is that enough? I really don't think us Scots believe it will be. Should we not now agree that there shall be some constitutional convention agreed immediately thereafter, and that shall talk not only about Scottish devolution, but the different arrangements necessary in the United Kingdom?
Ian Murray, how bankable, if the vote is no in September, how bankable are these promises of extra devolution, and can you even agree among yourselves what they should be?
Well, I don't think we have to agree amongst ourselves what they should be. I just think we have to say that it will be bankable. We've made the commitment. Ed Miliband's made that commitment. Joanne Lamont's made that commitment. There will be a Scotland bill in our first Queen's speech. The problem that we have, and the gentleman highlights it properly, if you do want to start a Scottish Constitutional Convention over where we go next, then that process would have to be delayed. But it was in the manifesto in 1997 to have a referendum of the Scottish Parliament. It's a guarantee that in the first Queen's speech of a Labour government returned at Westminster, we will have a Scotland bill, like we've just delivered the Scotland bill 2012, that brings more powers come 15,
so what will
16
be in that
and
Scotland
17.
bill?
Well, we have a devolution commission that shows already the qualifications that will be in there. There'll be welfare devolution, there'll be tax devolution, there'll be more devolution from Edinburgh downward to local authorities, there'll be devolution in terms of national minimum wage enforcement. There's a whole host of stuff in terms of the constitutional commission that we had that have already reported that will be in the first Queen's speech of a Labour government.
But that would depend on Labour winning an overall majority.
Well, that would depend.
So it's not bankable.
No, the other parties have said that they would do exactly the same. So your question to me was what would be in it, but that depends on
it was.
Who wins.
Exactly. So Annabel Goldie, are you voting for all that?
Well, the Conservatives have recently produced their report under Tom Smith-Clyde. He formed a commission. I was on it.
So is it the same as Ian Murray?
It's slightly more extensive in relation to income tax. We believe that all income tax should be raised in Scotland. We think that will bring real muscular financial responsibility to the Scottish Parliament. And can I just say to the gentleman, by way of reassuring him about history, I've got rather more recent history to tell him about, which is, Ian's quite correct. It was Labour and the Liberal Democrats who delivered devolution for Scotland. It was a Conservative-led coalition at Westminster which delivered the 2012 Scotland Act, a very powerful change to the devolution settlement, more powerful almost than the original Devolution Act of 1997-1998. So there is a track record of delivering for Scotland, and I would argue very strongly, just as Ian was saying, that the important thing is the three parties of the Union, interestingly, the three parties which have said quite correctly there will not be a currency union if we are independent. And one of these parties would be approached if we were independent and the rest of the United Kingdom was a foreign country, is one of these three unionist parties, or a coalition of them, would be approached by an independent Scotland, and there is not going to be a currency union. So let's be absolutely clear about that. But what I would say is important is the three unionist parties, Conservative, Labour, Liberal Democrats, are all for next year's general election going to produce manifestos. You have the choice. You can decide who you think is offering you the best bet. And I think that's real democracy. The point is, these three parties do not stand for no change in the devolution settlement.
Jeane Freeman, if the other parties are going to agree to more extensive devolution tax powers, all of income tax, Annabel Goldie says welfare policy as well, I mean, don't you win whatever the result is?
I think there's a problem with what the three parties are offering. There's a problem for certainly the Conservatives internally, in that their Tory chairman said that Labour, not internally, they said that Labour's offering was incoherent. There's a problem for the Labour Party because what they originally set out to do was much diminished after their Scottish Labour MPs couldn't agree on that, presumably because they were worried they would lose their jobs. Each of the party offerings are various forms of minimalist additions none of them actually offer... No, hold on. No. The problem with income tax, Annabel, is that it's not just about setting the powers on income tax, it's also about being able to move the threshold on income tax payments, because that's how you create a fairer economic distribution, by what you do with the thresholds in income tax. It's not enough in welfare just to say you can have, in Scotland, you can have powers over housing benefit if you can't have powers over the other elements of child benefit and all the other areas. So each of the political parties that say no to independence are offering dribs and drabs of additional powers. And the really interesting thing for me is that they're suddenly coming late to this party, because these are the parties who beforehand refused to countenance any alternative offer on that ballot box, turned their faces against it, and now are saying, but maybe we could offer you a wee bit here or a wee bit there. I am with that gentleman. I wouldn't trust it as far as I could spit.
Well, can I just point out, can I just add to that?
To the test.
Can I just add to that, though, Andrew? Because there is one thing here that a lot of people on the yes side have talked about the bedroom tax. The Scottish Parliament has the powers to mitigate the bedroom tax.
And
it took them 14 months to do it, and they refused to do it because it suited them not to. It's deplorable to say
This is important to be accurate. The Scottish Parliament has used the powers to mitigate the bedroom tax, and that is £268 million not being spent on other things in Scotland in order to mitigate against the impact of a tax that is imposed by a government that the majority of Scots did not vote for.
Would you give Scotland not just the income tax rate setting power, would you give them the power to move the thresholds where the rates click in?
It's a hugely complicated question, because if you look at you have to analyse what income tax does for the UK. Firstly, Scotland has about 8.4% of the population, as the lady said earlier, but only pays about 7.2% of the contribution to income tax. So you would end up in a situation where you could potentially make Scotland tax take poorer. And if you just look at the UK as a whole, there's very few, in comparison to the rest of the UK, higher rate taxpayers in Scotland, particularly the highest rate at £150,000, and therefore why wouldn't you want your share of the contribution that those others make? So there's a significant disparity. It's not an easy question to say, would you just hand over? That was all done in the Devolution Commission, and the conclusion came to, we would hand over the powers that were of benefit to Scotland, and if it's not of benefit to Scotland, why would we want to hand over powers that made Scotland poorer?
Okay. Gentleman there's got his hand up, and there's a lady right at the back. As well. But there's a gentleman there, you get the mic there, and then we'll get it over to you. Gentleman there, but you first, sir, in the light shirt. Yes.
My question is to Jeane.
Sorry, you're not in the light shirt. This gentleman here. Yes, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
It's a question for the three people supporting the motion.
Well, choose one.
Well, I'm just looking for one number from all three of them. All three of you had... all three of you
had a number of song, or...?
Bear with me.
What's the number?
Bear with me. All three of you had a common thread to your debate. All three of you asserted that you're opposed to uncertainty or gambling, and all three of you, to differing degrees, predicted that we would regret independence because we'd end up being worse off. Hopefully, you would agree that if you could predict with certainty that we would not be any worse off, but economically would be exactly the same, but we'd nonetheless be happier and a more cohesive society, you'd be supportive of independence. So my question is, if we could predict that we'd be significantly happier and a significantly more cohesive and productive society in the longer term, how much of a discount in your current income would you be prepared to take for independence?
Okay, choose someone to answer that. Just one.
George.
Well, if my auntie had a beard, she'd be my uncle. And the proposition is hypothetical, but absurd, because it's my case that we cannot possibly be better off. In fact, I assert that we'll be worse off on both sides of the border, which there would be, Andrew, by the way, contrary to your assertion, because the SNP intend to have a different immigration policy in Scotland than to England. And you can't have two immigration policies in one small island without having a border. But I believe that working people, ordinary people, not the best heeled, but most people, would be worse off on both sides of the border because there would be a race to the bottom. and Alex Salmond has already begun it. He's announced a 3% cut in profit tax, corporation tax. The Tories, who would rule for a long time in Westminster, I don't want to change Annabel's view on this, but would rule for a long time, will undercut him. And then Alex Salmond will have to undercut them, and before you know it, there won't be any corporation tax at all. So, whilst hypothetical, I think your proposition is so outlandish that it doesn't command any other answer than the one I've given, that
George.
We'd be worse off.
Yeah.
But, here's my point. The commonwealth of peoples in this small island that has lived together, worked together, fought and died together, are a critical mass of population that are capable of making real change. A small country of 5 million people in the storm-tossed ocean upheaval that we've got going on in the world today is very unlikely to
So,
be able
George,
to
what
do
would
that.
your explanation be for the fact that the countries which are doing best are smaller countries? Not just economically, and that's very, very clear that small countries are doing better economically, but also in terms of what was implied by the gentleman's question, are doing much, much better in terms of societal outcomes. Let me finish.
Well,
in terms of societal outcomes, in terms of life expectancy, in terms of health equality, in terms of educational outcomes. Why are smaller countries doing so much better? Also, the second point I'd make is, it's so interesting that, it's a fascinating thing about this debate, is so much of the no campaign is based on history, it's based on looking back. The yes campaign is based on looking forward. It's based on having a vision for the country. And I have to think. I have to.
Hold on, Blair,
I have to imagine.
You've made a very good point on small countries.
Okay, right.
And it deserves to be answered. It's a really interesting point. George Galloway.
It's based on looking forward to 1314, the 700th anniversary of the Battle of Bannockburn.
You're the
That's
one
why
that
this
mentioned
year
Small
was
countries.
chosen. Well, small countries like the Tiger, we used to be told to emulate the Republic of Ireland.
So
How's that doing? How's that doing? The small country Iceland that we used to be told we could be like, consumed in the volcanic ash of the economic collapse. If we'd been an independent small country in 2008, when the banks crashed, Andrew, crashed, then we would not be sitting here today. Our country would have been completely destroyed by that upheaval in 2008. We only still exist as a civil society because we had that critical mass of 65 million people across whom to spread the cost of bailing out the bankers.
Absolute nonsense, George. Because, no, absolute nonsense, George. You know damn fine, and I am tired of sitting here listening to you lie to this audience. You know damn fine, George, that the biggest bailout on that crash came from the United States. And you know damn fine that the basis on which those bailouts happened is a proportion of where the banks operate in, not where their headquarters are. And you also ought to know that actually a significant contributor to that crash was the deregulation of the banks and the financial services industry that the last Labour Chancellor led following on from Labour and previous Conservative governments. And that would not necessarily happen in Scotland because independence gives us a choice about how we regulate our industries. So stop telling lies.
Yeah, I must say I was most moved by Jeane's account of the plight of the poor in Scotland under this vile Tory government. It's one that I very much share. I just wonder what her message will be to the poor in England and Wales on the 19th September when Scotland sails off into the sunset.
Jeane Freeman.
You see, I've heard this argument a lot. And actually, for a lot of people like me who were born and brought up in Labour families, we had a real hard think to ourselves about precisely what lies behind your question, about the idea that we should stick together and work together in order to look after the most vulnerable and the poorest in our society. But I don't believe that the history of our involvement in the union that is the United Kingdom has produced that better result. And what I do believe is that Scotland can show a different way of running an economy, a different way of running a society. And what I also know is that friends and colleagues and people that I speak to in different parts of England tell me precisely that. What they say is, fire ahead, be independent, show us a different way, because that will add more argument and more girth to our mill in the arguments we need to have with our UK government. Right. So I think we will be doing the right thing for ourselves and the right thing for others.
I just need to get some more people in from the floor. There's a lady up at the back with her hand up. We get a microphone. Who's got the microphone at the moment? Anybody? Right, another one over there. Keep your hand up so we can get to them. Gentleman there in the pink shirt. But the lady there, yes.
Having spent much of my professional